All right, what's going on, y'all? Hey, I've chosen three passages to read today that I think the text speaks for itself. I'm going to do a lot of reading, maybe make a few comments, but we know that human nature has not changed. But yet, over past few decades and before that, we've seen such a radical shift in the way our culture and society has been dealing with matters of morality, and it's really affected so many different areas of our lives. On this channel, I primarily focus on the transgender issue, and I believe that we're in this place right now as we see the sexual revolution years ago that led to homosexual activism and now the transgender agenda. We have legislation that's posed, I think it's called the Equality Act, which is a radical just insertion of gender identity and sexual orientation throughout law. ENDA, the Employment Non-Discrimination Act. It's going to affect religious freedom and freedom of speech in this country. We see hate speech already making inroads all over Europe and Canada. And we're here at this time in history because we have made choices and the church has failed. And these three passages I want to read, I want to start off in Proverbs 30:11. It says, "There is a generation that curses its father and does not bless its mother. There is a generation that is pure in its own eyes, yet is not washed from its filthiness. There is a generation, oh, how lofty are their eyes, and their eyelids are lifted up. There is a generation whose teeth are like swords, and whose fangs are like knives, to devour the poor from off the earth, and the needy from among men." I'm going to turn to Romans 1:18. This is a lengthy passage, but I think it really is put at the beginning of Romans, the epistle that highlights this is God's plan for salvation and redemption, and this is man's condition. And there's nothing new going on here, but there's principles that we can, I think, learn from as we see what's going on around us right now. In Romans 1:18 it says, "For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men, who suppress the truth in unrighteousness. Because what may be known of God is manifest in them, for God has shown it to them. For since the creation of the world his invisible attributes are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse. Because although they knew God, they did not glorify him as God, nor were thankful, but became futile in their thoughts, and their foolish hearts were darkened. Professing to be wise, they became fools, and changed the glory of the incorruptible God into an image made like corruptible man, and birds, and four-footed animals, and creeping things. Therefore, God also gave them up to uncleanness, in the lust of their hearts, to dishonor their bodies among themselves, who exchanged the truth of God for the lie, and worship and serve the creature rather than the Creator, who is blessed forever. Amen. For this reason God gave them up to vile passions, for even their women exchanged the natural use for what is against nature. Likewise also the men, leaving the natural use of the woman, burned in their lust for one another, men with men committing what is shameful, and receiving in themselves the penalty of their error which was due. And even as they did not like to retain God in their knowledge, God gave them over to a debased mind, to do those things which are not fitting, being filled with all unrighteousness, sexual immorality, wickedness, covetousness, maliciousness, full of envy, murder, strife, deceit, evil-mindedness. They are whisperers, backbiters, haters of God, violent, proud, boasters, inventors of evil things, disobedient to parents, undiscerning, untrustworthy, unloving, unforgiving, unmerciful, who, knowing the righteous judgment of God, that those who practice such things are deserving of death, not only do the same, but also approve of those who practice them." And so we see how Paul really sets up his presentation of the gospel and man's need for God and redemption and salvation. And I know I deal with some pretty heavy-hitting topics of discussion on this channel, and some might perceive me as being heavy-handed or just lacking in joy or peace. And really it's important that we understand that we need to receive the bad news before we can receive the good news. The bad news is we're all in this mess together. We decided to walk away from God, to do things our own way. And God said, if you want to have it your way, you can have it your way. I want to focus on Romans 1:26 and 28, because I started off reading Proverbs 30 because we see something of the way God deals with an entire generation. Certainly he deals with this on an individual level, but there's something to be said when an entire generation turns from God. He says if we decide to do that, he will give us over to vile passions. And in Romans 1:26 and 27, he talks about the way that men and women abandon maleness and femaleness as he designed it, and sexual roles and sexual desires were twisted. And as we walk down that road, it opens up a door in Romans 1:28, even as they did not like to retain God in their knowledge, God gave them over to a debased mind. And so as we continue to walk down that dark road, it leads to darker things all the way until the end in judgment. And I was going to read out of 2 Timothy 3:1-5. I'll just suggest you turn over there. It talks about the end times generation. And certainly we're closer to that day than when those words were first inspired and written down. But I just want to point out that I believe that there's an entire generation of youth that are being led astray because God's protection is not upon this land as it once was. I believe when I first started dabbling with transgender things at age 12, that was because certainly I made my own decision and made my own choices to follow after those things. But I believe I was exposed to that dark material because the hedges are down in the United States, because there's a whole generation and several before that have not honored God. There's been a church that's been powerless. And so Satan is having a field day. He's able to attack and just launch an offensive against this land upon undiscerning minds, upon rebellious minds and hearts. And so I turned after those things and went after them. But I know that human nature has not changed, and we haven't seen such just a widespread lack of restraint like we're seeing today in the history of this nation. And I don't believe it's because human nature has changed. We know that's not the case. But the satanic influence has increased because God's protection has been removed, and he's given us over to these things. So I encourage you to check out 2 Timothy 3:1-5 and meditate upon these passages, because I believe they're very helpful in understanding where we're at as a nation and how we can each individually turn to God and find Christ, the Lord, who will set us free. He will set us free. Love you guys. God bless you.